Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschil, Akiras Gufei Ka Akiras Chayfetz Dami Oy Loy. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we can better understand what part of the Gemara Tosfos is coming to explain. At this point in the Gemara, we were explaining the question that Rav asked Rebbe. Rav asked Rebbe, what is the din if somebody put onto his fellow objects while he was standing in Rishus HaYachid, and he walked out into the Rishus HaRabim, and he put it down? The question is he chayav or not? What's the question based on? So we explained it's based on a question of, do we say akiras gufay ka akiras chayfetz dami or loy? Do we say the akira of the person's body amounts to akira on the items, and therefore an akira was done, and then afterwards he took it out to Rishus HaRabim and he put it down, so he's chayav because he did the malacha of Eitzah, or loy? Or do we say no? The akira of the body is not an akira of the items. The body had an akira, the objects didn't. Let's begin with a general outline of Tosfos. So in the Gemara we asked, do we say akiras gufei ka akiras chayfetz dami oy loy? There's two parts of Tosfos. Number one is, Tosfos will explain that the same question could have been asked regarding the hanacha. We could also ask, is the hanacha of the body, does that amount to hanacha of the items or not? And the second part of Tosfos is, Tosfos will ask, why didn't the Gemara answer this question of, do we say akiras gufei ka akiras chayfetz dami or not? We could have answered it, it seems, from a Mishnah that's brought down later on Daf Yud Aleph. So let's now see the Tosfos in the flowchart form. The Gemara asked, do we say the akira of the person's body, do we say that amounts to the akira of the object or not? So Tosfos explains, he brings out a pirush from the Ri, that the same question could have been asked about the hanacha. And what would the question be? If a person lifted up an item in Rishus HaYachid, so there's no question about the akira, and then he walked out into Rishus HaRabim, and he came to a full stop, he stopped to rest. So it's not a stop just for a moment, but he came to a full rest. Do we say that the hanacha of his body amounts to hanacha of the objects, so now he did akira, haitzah, and hanacha, so he's chayiv? Or do we say no? There was no hanacha here. There was hanacha of the body, but no hanacha of the objects. Now, Tosfos is going to respond to a question that could be asked. There are mefarshim that say that the question of hanacha is not a question. It's obvious that the hanacha of a person's body amounts to the hanacha of the objects, like we see in our Mishnah, as we'll see in a moment how. So they say that the question is only about the akira and not the hanacha. Tosfos here is saying that the question is not just about the akira, it's also about the hanacha, and he will explain why we cannot resolve it from our Mishnah, and therefore the question stands. So he says, and we cannot answer this question from our Mishnah. It would seem we could, because one of the cases in our Mishnah is the haitzah of the ani. The ani extended his hand inwards. He took something out of the balabayas' hand, and then he brought it out into Rishus HaRabim, and it says that he's chayiv. Now he didn't do any hanacha. We must say that the reason why he's chayiv is because the hanacha of his body, his hand and his body are in the same rishus. His body is at a full rest, and since the hanacha of the body amounts to the hanacha of the items, that's why he's chayiv. Says Tosfos, no, we cannot resolve this question about the hanacha from the Mishnah, because we could explain that our Mishnah is referring to a case where the individual put the object down. Let's now continue and see Tosfos' question. Tosfos asks, why couldn't we answer this question from the Mishnah later on in Daf Yud Aleph? The Mishnah later on in Daf Yud Aleph says that a tailor is not allowed to go out on Erev Shabbos with a needle in his garment. They would wear a needle in their garment to have it available. A tailor is not allowed to walk around with a needle in his garment on Erev Shabbos, because we're concerned that if he does so, he might end up continue carrying it even after Shabbos begins. So now Tosfos explains how from here we can prove that the akira of the body amounts to the akira of the object. So why didn't we prove it from here? Now, if let us say that the akira of the person's body does not amount to akira of the object, then the Chazal would not have made this asur. Because the way it works is by a gzeira, is if there's an isser menatera, then Chazal will make a gzeira that a person shouldn't do a behavior that could lead to that. However, if the only thing that a person could come to is an isser which is only d'Rabbanan on its own, the Chazal are not going to say, let's make another gzeira so that you don't come to this. They will say there's an isser menatera, we're going to put a boundary to avoid it, we're going to make another isser. But they won't say, oh, now that we established this isser, we're going to make another one for it. Because this one's not really usser on its own, that's the explanation for it. It's just a boundary for that one. At any rate, if the akira of the person's body does not amount to akira of the item, then Chazal would not have said a tailor can't go out with his needle on Erev Shabbos, since what's the worst thing that's going to happen? We're making a gzeira, don't do it on Erev Shabbos. Why not? Because you might come to do it on Shabbos. So what if he does it on Shabbos? It's not a malacha, since the akira of the body does not amount to akira of the item. So obviously we see that the akira of the body does amount to akira of the item. And therefore Chazal said, since if he would carry it on Shabbos, the akira of his body would create akira of the item, and he would come to an actual complete malacha. Therefore, on Erev Shabbos, we're going to make it usher for him to carry the needle, since we want to avoid that isser menatera. Tosfos answers, without an explanation, he just says that even so they would make it usher. That even though the akira of the body will not amount to Akira of the item, and the whole Isser would be an Isser Midrabanan, that type of carrying on Shabbos, where the Akira was only done with the body. Nevertheless, even though we generally don't make a Gzera, here we would. And Tosfos doesn't explain. So to summarize Tosfos, first Tosfos explained from the Pirush from the Ri, that the question of do we say the Akira of the body amounts to the Akira of the item, the same exact question applies to the Hanacha. Do we say the Hanacha of the body amounts to the Hanacha of the item? And he explained that although it seems that this question could be resolved from the Mishnah, it cannot. The second part of Tosfos was a question from the Ri, why can't we resolve this question of do we say Akira's Gufay, Ka Akira's Chayvetz Dami, Eloi, why can't we resolve it from the Mishnah later on in Daf Yud Aleph that speaks about the Isser for a tailor to walk around with a needle in his garment on Erev Shabbos?